Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're tackling something that can be a real headache for Spanish learners.
Oh yeah, definitely a headache, but also super important if you want to sound fluent.
For sure. We're talking about Spanish articles la una, and all those times when you don't use an article at all.
And the tricky part is those articles are everywhere. They're like the tiny little words that can make or break a sentence.
Exactly. So we'll be breaking down a lesson by a Spanish teacher named Hemi Lara. He does a great job of explaining the rules and giving really clear examples.
And what I love about his approach is he focuses on the why behind the rules. It's not just about memorizing, it's about understanding.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. Hemi starts off by tackling when you don't need an article, which, believe it or not, can be just as tricky as knowing when to use one.
Yeah, it's like a whole other layer of complexity. You'd think leaving a word out would be easier.
Right. But there are definitely some patterns to watch out for, and Hemi gives a really helpful example right off the bat. Queda agua en la botella.
Which means there's water in the bottle.
Right. And there's no article before agua water because it's untountable.
Kind of like in English. You wouldn't say water, would you?
Nope. Makes total sense. And he goes on to point out that you don't need articles for nationalities either. Like, mi padres son francés, my parents are French.
And professions too, unless you're being specific.
All right.
Like, Juan escribe libros de ciencia ficción. Juana writes science fiction books. No article needed for libros.
Okay, so we're starting to see some patterns here. Uncountable nouns, nationalities, professions. But then Jaime throws in a little twist.
Oh yeah, this is where it gets interesting. He says if you make the profession more specific with an adjective, then you do need an article.
Like, Juan Luis es arquitecto. Juan Luis is an architect versus Juan Luis es un arquitecto excelente.
Which is, Juan Luth is an excellent architect. That one little adjective, excelente, changes the whole game.
It's amazing how one word can make such a big difference, right? It's all about being precise with your meaning.
Exactly. And that precision is what makes Spanish such a beautiful and expressive language. But it's definitely something that takes time and practice to master.
So we've talked about uncountable nouns, nationalities, professions, but have you noticed any other patterns? Like, what about liquids, water, coffee, juice? Do they usually need articles?
Generally, no, unless you're talking about a specific amount, like a cup of coffee. But even then, Jaime throws in a curveball.
Oh, what's that?
He says that insumo o juice isn't technically correct, but everyone uses it, especially when referring to a bottle of juice.
So it's more about common usage than strict grammar rules in that case.
Exactly. Language is constantly evolving, and sometimes those everyday expressions become more common than the grammatically correct ones.
It's a good reminder to pay attention to how people actually speak the language, not just what the textbooks say.
Absolutely. And Jaime is really good at pointing out those little nuances. Okay, so we've covered some of the basics of when not to use an article, but now let's shift gears and talk about when you do need them and how to make sure you're using the right one.
Because that's where things can get really tricky, right? You've got to choose between ella, una, and make sure it all agrees with the noun.
It's like a puzzle where all the pieces have to fit perfectly. But don't worry, Jaime's got some great tips to help us navigate this article maze.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about plural nouns, like pantalones, pants. What's the rule there?
Plural nouns always need articles, and those articles need to match in both number and gender. So if you're talking about pantalones, you need to use los, because it's masculine plural.
Ah, so that agreement between articles, nouns, and adjectives is super important.
It's one of the things that makes Spanish so elegant, but it can definitely be a headache for learners. It's all about practice and getting a feel for how everything fits together.
Okay, so plural nouns need articles, and they've got to agree. Now, what about those tricky proper nouns, like people's names?
This one's actually pretty straightforward. Jaime makes it super clear. You never use articles before people's names in Spanish.
Yes.
Just like in English.
Okay, that makes sense. So no, el Juan or la Maria, it's just Juan and Maria.
Exactly. Now, place names are a whole other story.
Oh yeah, place names always seem to have their own special rules. So what's the deal with articles and place names?
Well, cities usually don't take articles, so you'd say en Córdoba, in Córdobas. But some places like La Coruña have the article built in.
And then there are countries. Some need articles, some don't. It's enough to make your head spin.
Right. Most countries don't need articles, but there are always those exceptions, like El Reino Unido, the United Kingdom, and Los Estados Unidos, the United States. It's all about knowing which ones are special cases.
And the best way to learn those is probably just through exposure, right? The more you read and hear Spanish, the more you'll start to pick up on those patterns.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's how we learn.
Okay, so We've covered the no article rule, and we've got a handle on agreement. But now things are about to get really interesting. Heyman's going to start focusing on the difference between definite articles, el la, and indefinite articles, un.
And this is where you really start to understand the nuance and why choosing the right article matters. It's like leveling up your Spanish skills.
So buckle up, everyone. We're about to delve into the fascinating world of definite versus indefinite articles.
It's going to be a wild ride.
But I have a feeling we're going to learn a ton along the way.
I agree with you there. I think this is where things start to click for a lot of learners, and they really start to see the beauty and complexity of the Spanish language.
So let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll dive right into Jaime's examples and see how he breaks down this tricky topic.
Sounds good. I'm ready for the challenge. Welcome back. So we've already seen how tricky these Spanish articles can be, but now we're going to dive even deeper with Jaime's next set of exercises.
And these exercises really put your knowledge to the test because Jaime asks his students to decide whether to use an article ata all.
Yeah, it's like a pop quiz on everything we've covered so far.
Yeah.
And it forces you to really think about the nuances of each rule.
Exactly. So let's jump right in. One of the first examples Jaime gives is queda agua en la botella.
Which we already know means there's water in the bottle, and of course there's no article before agua because it's uncountable.
Right. But then he throws in a twist with the sentence, ¿Me puede poner café, por favor?
Which means, can you bring me coffee, please?
So technically, café is also uncountable, like agua, but
But in this case, we know the speaker is asking for a cup of coffee. It's all about understanding the implied meaning.
so even though the sentence doesn't explicitly say a cup of coffee, we can infer it from the context.
Exactly. And that's why context is so important when it comes to Spanish articles. Sometimes you have to read between the lines to figure out which rule applies.
Okay, so we've seen how the no article rule can be tricky, even with simple things like water and coffee. Now let's revisit those other categories where articles aren't usually needed, like nationalities.
Right. Jan gives the example, mis padres son franceses. My parents are French. No article before Francis.
And that reminds us that those broader categories like nationalities, religions, professions often have their own specific rules about articles.
It's like each category has its own little quirk you need to learn. And speaking of professions, Jaime reminds us that Juan Luis es arquitecto. Juan Luis is an architect. Doesn't need an article.
But if you add an adjective like excelente,
Then, boom, you need the indefinite article. Juan Luis es un arquitecto excelente. Juan Luis is an excellent architect.
it's amazing how one little adjective can completely change the grammatical structure of the sentence.
It's like the adjective makes the profession more specific, more defined, and that's when you need the article to signal that shift in meaning.
Okay, so we're starting to see how these seemingly simple rules can actually be quite nuanced. Now, what about plural nouns, like our old friend pantalones?
Pantalones. Those tricky pants. They always need an article. And remember, the article has to agree in both number and gender.
So los pantalones because it's masculine plural.
Exactly. That agreement is crucial in Spanish. It's like a dance where every word has to move in harmony with the others.
Okay, so plural nouns always need articles and they've got to agree. Now let's move on to those proper nouns, like people's names.
That was a little easier to remember. Jaime emphasizes that you never use articles before people's names in Spanish.
Just like in English? No, the John or the Mary.
Exactly. It's just John and Mary. Simple as that.
Okay, now place names are always a bit of a wild card. So what's the deal with articles and place names?
Well, Jaime explains that cities usually don't take articles. So you just say, in Córdoba, in Córdoba.
But some places like La Coruña have the article built right into the name.
And then there are countries. Some need articles, some don't. It's all about remembering those special cases.
Like El Reino Unido en los Estados Unidos.
Exactly. It's enough to make your head spin. But the good news is, the more you immerse yourself in Spanish, the more you'll start to internalize these rules.
It's like learning any new skill. At first it seems overwhelming, but with practice, it becomes second nature.
And that's why it's so important to not be afraid of making mistakes. The more you practice, the more you'll learn.
So we've tackled the no article rule. We've got a handle on agreement. And we're starting to see how context plays a crucial role. Now get ready for the grand finale, the battle of the definite and indefinite articles.
This is where things get really exciting, because we're going to see how those tiny little words, el, la, un, una, can convey so much nuance and meaning.
And Haynes got some amazing examples that will really make those light bulbs go off. So are you ready to put your detective hat on and analyze some tricky sentences?
Absolutely.
Let's do this.
Okay, so we've made it to the final showdown, the ultimate article challenge. Definite versus indefinite articles.
This is where it all comes together.
Yeah.
And you really start to see the power of those tiny little words.
So James starts off by giving his students this sentence. Me he comprado una casa en la playa. I bought a house on the beach. Seems simple enough, right?
But then he asks them why una for the house and la for the beach.
And that's where things get interesting, because it forces you to think about the difference between new information and shared knowledge. Exactly. You use una, the indefinite article for the house, because it's a new piece of information. We're hearing about this house for the first time. But la playa, the beach, gets the definite article because it's assumed to be a shared known entity.
It's like saying, we both know about this beach, so I don't need to spell it out for you.
And Homie gives another great example to illustrate this point. El euro es la moneda europea. The euro is the European currency.
Both euro and moneda europea get the definite article because we're talking about specific, well-established things.
It's like we're both looking at the same picture and we both know what it is.
And that's the beauty of articles. They help us create that shared understanding between speaker and listener.
They're like those little signposts that guide us through the conversation and make sure we're both on the same page.
Okay, so we're starting to see how those definite and indefinite articles can really fine-tune our meaning. Now, to wrap up this lesson, Hami gives his students one final challenge.
A true test of their article mastery.
He gives them sentences with blanks where the article should be, and they have to choose the correct one based on everything they've learned.
It's like the final exam for article aficionados.
And you can really see the wheels turning in their heads as they apply all those rules about agreement, accountability, and shared knowledge.
It's amazing to see how far they've come since the beginning of the lesson.
And I think that's one of the most rewarding things about language learning. Seeing how all those seemingly disparate pieces start to fit together.
It's like solving a puzzle or unlocking a secret code.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of Spanish articles, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think the key is to remember that mastering articles takes time and practice. It's not something you can learn overnight.
It's like learning any new skill. It requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to make mistakes.
And the more you immerse yourself in the language, the more intuitive those article choices will become.
It's all about developing that feel for what sounds right.
And don't be afraid to ask questions or consult resources like Himi's YouTube channel. There's a wealth of information out there to help you on your Spanish learning journey.
Well said. So to all our listeners out there, keep practicing, keep exploring, and keep those language gears turning.
And remember, the most important thing is to have fun with it. Because when you enjoy the process, the learning comes naturally.
On that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the wonderful world of Spanish articles. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and happy language learning where